Harvard, Claudine Gay, this DEI scandal. You've got Bill Ackman going around saying that this is a win for DEI. Claudine Gay, the former president of Harvard, has been ousted in her role. And DEI is for diversity, equity, and inclusiveness. It's really just a fancy term for wokeness. It's the crowd that doesn't like the woke policies. They call it DEI if they don't want to use the word woke, but really just it's wokeism. Okay, so they're saying this is a win against wokeism. The woke president gets ousted. We're going to go anti-woke. We're going to take back the universities. We're going to make sure that they are no longer in this, which I agree, the wokeness in colleges had gone quite far. These students were canceling people with different opinions. They didn't want speakers to show up and speak. They were saying if you had a different opinion, then they didn't want you on campus. They needed safe spaces for their students. It had certainly absolutely gone way overboard, and universities were no longer a place where people could have an exchange of ideas. It was either you agree with this one idea or you're out, you're canceled. That's what makes this whole thing so interesting. So let's first go through just a little bit of what happened before we get to this Bill Ackman hypocrisy as I see it. Claudine Gay resigned. This is her resignation letter. She decides to step down. It's important to note. So she says, it's with a heavy heart, but with deep love for Harvard that I write to share I'll be stepping down as president. Oh, I didn't come to this decision easily. It's been difficult beyond words, yada, yada. Okay, so she's upset. She's resigned. She's not being fired from the university. She still gets to keep her $900,000 a year salary. Harvard's paying quite a bit. And she's just no longer going to be president of Harvard. Now, the reason why she's been asked to resign or why she decided to resign or why they asked her to resign, why she's stepping aside is over plagiarism, which is very serious. And yes, she should resign over the plagiarism. She should not be president of a university with 17 instances of plagiarism throughout her work. If a student was caught doing the same thing, they would be expelled. She absolutely should not be in the role of president because of the plagiarism, for sure. But let's be really honest and let's be really clear. Nobody would have found the plagiarism had it not been for the witch hunt against Claudine Gay, the witch hunt that started with accusations of anti-Semitism. So it was the crowd saying she's anti-Semitic, and because she's anti-Semitic, we're going to dig through every ounce of her life, and we're going to find something that's going to nail her. We're going to find something that's going to get rid of her. What does that sound like to you? Doesn't that sound quite an awful a lot like the woke students at universities that would listen to a professor say something like, oh, I don't know, I don't really like all this wokeism. Like, for example, Brett Weinstein, who was ousted from his university essentially because he said, hey, all of this this kind of wokeism has gone too far. And they said, oh, you think it's gone too far? Well, we're going to get you. And they made his life a living hell. That happened to many people. They would then do a witch hunt. They would start digging through all of your tweets and find something from 10 years ago or find something, find an accuser to accuse you of sexual misconduct or something. And then that would be the thing that would get you. They couldn't get you for your opinion necessarily, but they could get you for some other wrongdoing if they could just dig deep enough and find it. So that is exactly what happened to Claudine Gay. No way around it. This wasn't about plagiarism. This wasn't like, oh, they had discovered plagiarism and now she's out. No, this was a witch hunt. And then they found the plagiarism. And yes, when they found that, she should be out. But we have to be honest about why they even found it. This was really, truly a witch hunt over anti-Semitism. What was the anti-Semitism? Well, it was when Representative Elise Stefanik grilled Gay in a hearing along with the presidents of MIT and Penn. The Penn president is no longer around. She also stepped down. The MIT professor, I believe, is being pressured heavily. The president is being pressured heavily to step down by Bill Ackman. And this is, if you remember this, here's the clip. This is Elise Stefanik grilling Gay in the congressional hearing that led to the accusations of anti-Semitism.
And Dr. Gay, at Harvard, does calling for the genocide of Jews violate Harvard's rules of bullying and harassment, yes or no?
It can be, depending on the context.
What's the context?
Targeted as an individual, at an individual.
It's targeted at Jewish students, Jewish individuals. Do you understand your testimony is dehumanizing them? Do you understand that dehumanization is part of anti-Semitism? I will ask you one more time. Does calling for the genocide of Jews violate Harvard's rules of bullying and harassment? Yes or no?
Anti-Semitic rhetoric, when it
And is it
crosses into
anti-Semitic rhetoric?
Anti-Semitic rhetoric, when it crosses into conduct that amounts to bullying, harassment, intimidation, that is actionable conduct, and we do take action.
So the answer is yes, that calling for the genocide of Jews violates Harvard Code of Conduct, correct?
Again, it depends on the context.
It does not depend on the context. The answer is yes, and this is why you should resign. These are unacceptable answers across the board.
Elise Stefanik later tweeted when Claudine Gay did step down, 2 down. Harvard knows that this long overdue forced resignation of the anti-Semitic plagiarist president is just the beginning of what will be the greatest scandal of any college or university in history. So there she is celebrating this. Now, Bill Ackman was very much involved in the takedown of Claudine Gay. The Harvard board did not want her to step aside. They stood by her after the Penn president resigned. The Harvard board actually stood behind Claudine Gay and said, we're going to stick with her. It was only when Bill Ackman, the billionaire, decided to really, truly go after her when things started to change. Bill Ackman wrote a letter to Harvard. This is what he tweeted out. Please see my letter today to Harvard Governing Board of Directors. This was December 10th. Dear members of the Harvard governing boards, in her short tenure as president, Claudine Gay has done more damage to the reputation of Harvard University than any individual in our nearly 500-year history. Now, I'm going to point out what he says specifically in this letter because it counters what he then later says as he's saying this is a win for anti-wokeism, a defeat against wokeism. He says, because of her failure to condemn the most vile and barbaric terrorism the world has ever seen, for supporting rather than condemning 34 Harvard-branded student organizations who hold Israel entirely responsible for Hamas's barbaric attacks, for failing to enforce Harvard's own rules on student conduct, and for her other failures of leadership, President Gay catalyzed an explosion of anti-Semitism and hate on campus that is unprecedented in Harvard's history. In light of Harvard's leadership position, President Gay's mishandling of October 7th and its aftermath on campus have led to the metastasis of anti-Semitism to other universities and institutions around the world. So he's clearly talking about anti-Semitism. That is what he's upset about. He's not upset about safe spaces. In fact, he's complaining that there are no safe spaces. He's saying, where are the safe spaces for the Jewish students? By the way, many Jewish students were taking part in these protests that he claims are against the Jewish students. He's saying these Jewish students don't feel safe, and it's yet the Jewish students who are out there, many of them protesting, saying free Palestine from the river to the sea, which is considered an anti-Semitic genocidal statement. Many of those students out there chanting that are Jewish themselves. Yet, nonetheless, he's saying, but other Jewish students were not feeling safe. Where are their safe spaces? You did not provide a safe environment for everybody to feel welcome and safe, and therefore you've got to go. We will not allow anti-Semitism, is what he's saying. He then later goes on to say after she gets, she ended up getting ousted from the job, right? She was ousted, or she resigned. And then she was replaced by a Jewish man. And this is the other thing to think. Claudine Gay was not replaced with, if it was if wokeism were the rot and the power at the university, Claudine Gay, who was a Black woman, the first Black female president of Harvard in the history of the university, would have been replaced with maybe somebody else also who represented woke, right? If the woke people were truly in charge. But the woke people clearly are not in charge in this particular situation. Bill Ackman, who is a new form of woke, is. So Claudine Gay, what Bill Ackman is talking about when he's saying it's wokeism, which actually, let me first read what he claims about the wokeism and the DEI policies. Let me just make sure he writes this another big letter after she's resigns. And he says, this is what he says in his tweet. It's a long tweet, so I'm only going to read the DEI portions of it, which remember that just is a fancy word for woke. He says, the more I learned, the more concerned I became, and the more ignorant I realized I had been about DEI, a powerful movement that has not only pervaded Harvard, but the educational system at large. I came to understand that diversity, equity, and inclusion was not what I had naively thought these words meant. I've always believed that diversity is an important feature of a successful organization. But by diversity, I mean diversity in its broadest form. Diversity of viewpoints, politics, ethnicity, race, age, religion, experience, socioeconomic background, sexual identity, gender, one's upbringing, and more. What I learned, however, was that DEI was not about diversity in its purest form, but rather DEI was a political advocacy movement on behalf of certain groups that are deemed oppressed under DEI's own methodology. Under DEI, one's degree of oppression is determined based upon where one resides on the so-called intersectional pyramid of oppression, where whites, Jews, and Asians are deemed oppressors, and a subset of people of color, LGBTQ people, and or women who are deemed to be oppressed. Under this ideology, which is the philosophical underpinning of DEI as advanced by Ibram X, Kennedy, and others, one is either an anti-racist or a racist. There's no such thing as being not racist. So he's written this whole letter saying, he patting himself on the back, Claudine Gay is out, and here's what we're doing. We're fighting against this DEI that is about that whites, Jews, and Asians are the oppressors, and everybody else is not an oppressor. That's not true. That's clearly not true. The proof is in the pudding, Bill. Claudine Gay was just removed, and she was replaced. She stepped aside, and they didn't replace her with another woke person, like a trans person that they were, we're going to replace her with another woke, somebody more woke than her. It's not like a white man was sitting in charge of Harvard as president and they just ousted him to put in the black woman, Claudine Gay, right? That would have been, this wokeism is really pervasive at the university and they've gotten all this power and it's really ridiculous. But instead they removed her and they put in a Jewish man who Bill Ackman thinks would then be more apparently sympathetic to the plight of the Jewish kids on school who maybe feel offended by the other Jewish kids who are protesting about about Israel's treatment of Palestinians. That is the exact same scenario as a white man being removed from his position after being discovered to, let's say, have inappropriate sexual relations with a student, after a witch hunt, because he said something that was against wokeism. And the woke mob, including some white students, white male students, let's say, who were involved as well, would have then engaged in this woke mob movement to oust him and replace him with a black woman or a trans person or whatever, right? I mean, that is literally what people are afraid of when people say, oh, this DEI has gone too far, this wokeism has gone too far. And that is actually what Bill Ackman has also proceeded to do. He said, I don't like this person. I don't like what they stand for. I don't like their opinions. I don't like that they make certain students feel unsafe or they're in too much. The woke people have too much power. So we're going to remove them and replace them with somebody that we think is the oppressed. And he's saying, really, it's not, the woke people. What he's arguing is that the woke people have too much power and the people who are actually oppressed would be the whites, Asians, and Jews, apparently. And so we need to replace this woke person with instead a white, an Asian, or a Jew. I mean, doesn't he see that he's actually just doing exactly the very thing that he's arguing against? That this wasn't really about restoring true diversity to the university. This was clearly, and he wrote it in his first letter to the Board of Governors of Harvard, that he was pissed off about anti-Semitism, what he felt like was anti-Semitism. This would be no different than somebody writing and saying, I'm pissed off about the white people are running everything and they're causing problems. And so we need to replace them with somebody who's not white. And that's exactly what he did, but just with a different group. He decided a different group was actually more oppressed and he wanted to bring them more into power and eliminate the wokeists who he thinks are in too much power. And so he's just reversing it. It's just like, instead of racism and anti-racism, It's wokeism and anti-wokeism. It's like or reverse, they say racism and reverse racism. And reverse racism is still racism. This is just reverse wokeism. That's all this was. And yeah, Claudine Gay should absolutely be gone from plagiarism, 100%. She shouldn't be there for plagiarism. But the only reason why they found it was because they did this reverse woke mob trying to get rid of her because they say, hey, wait a minute, we don't like the wokeism anymore. And we have another group who we believe are oppressed. And it's disgusting that you're against them and that you make any sort of statement. Like if you were a president of a university and you said a woman is a woman, could you imagine the backlash from the wokeism, right? The woke would say, oh my gosh, how dare you, you're so offensive, and now all these trans students don't feel safe. And so we're going to oust you. We're going to find something in your past to oust you because you've made this offensive remark against trans people. And they oust him and then they replace him with a trans person. I mean, this is exactly what Bill Ackman did. And yet so many conservatives on social media, I'm seeing this, and in the mainstream news, they are just applauding him and his efforts. They're applauding the resignation of Claudine Gay, saying this is a win for reverse woke. This is a win for the anti-woke, when really all they did was use their own form of wokeism against Claudine Gay to get her ousted. And this is just how it seems to go. It's just like with the censorship stuff. With censorship, it was, we're anti-censorship until it's something we want censored. And then suddenly we see people then advocating for censorship who were always the people advocating against the censorship. And now they're the ones advocating for the censorship because it's something they don't like. So it's just emotion. That's all it is. This is not rooted in any logic. It's not rooted in actually restoring true diversity. True diversity would allow Claudine Gay, she was actually in that one moment, she might be ultra woke with everything else, I don't know. She might be the type of person that wants to cancel everybody for everything else and censor other students. I don't know anything about her. But in this particular instance, she was saying the students can say whatever they want until it crosses over into direct harassment, bullying, threats to a person. Until once you get to that point, then that is when it's a crime, or that is when it's against the university's policies. But otherwise, you're allowed to have your opinions and you can say what you want, even if those opinions are offensive, as long as they don't cross into that. And she was defending that principle in that very moment. Whether or not she defends it the rest of the time, I don't know. But in that moment, that is what she was defending. And she was right. She was actually right. You have to allow people to say things that are even offensive to you, as long as they're not crossing into that territory of harassment, bullying, direct incitement of violence, threats, those types of things. That's different. But I just found this whole thing so hypocritical, just very, very hypocritical. And so many people are so gullible and they're so willing to quickly gobble this up like this is some win for anti-wokeism. No, it isn't. It was just wokeism in a new shiny package. That's all it was. And all this did, and I even tweeted out to Bill Ackman, I said, what do you think you've accomplished with this? All you've accomplished is you just reiterated to all of these students who feel like Israel has way too much power and that the anti-Semitism is being weaponized, and you've given them ammunition for that. Now people are thinking, yeah, see, this is exactly anti-Semitism. Anti-Semitism was weaponized against speech, and now it's not like these students are suddenly going to wake up and say, oh, you're right. I don't agree anymore with the genocide going on. It's fine. I was just indoctrinated with wokeism in believing that massacring 20,000 people in a short period of time is wrong. I mean, does he really think that people are going to wake up and say, oh my gosh, it was the woke policies that totally made me believe that slaughtering thousands of children was a bad thing? Of course it's not a bad thing. You have to defend yourself against all of those children, because they were totally going to grow up and come to get you. So you just have to get rid of them, all of them. Yeah, this didn't accomplish anything. All this did actually was further cause, I think, more real anti-Semitism. I think more people will look at this and see that Bill Ackman was able to replace Claudine Gay with a Jewish man. They could have, and I think that was kind of a bad move, in my opinion. They really, if they were to stick by their principles, those who wanted her ousted should have replaced her with maybe another black woman, but one that with an opinion that they liked, in order to I guess, prove the point that they weren't, because it'd be similar if you're going to oust somebody and say, you're not supportive enough of trans, and then you replace them with somebody trans, then that person says, this is exactly what I'm talking about. You guys have gone so woke that this is, it's not on merit. It's not on, it's just on identity. You just put somebody in here because of their identity. So I think it was it was a bad move of Harvard to replace her with a Jewish man in particular, simply because that would breed more anti-Semitism. People would look at that and think, so this was about anti-Semitism, and so you replace her with somebody that you think certainly will not engage in what you consider to be anti-Semitism. Yeah, I just think that was a really bad move. So the whole thing reeks of wokeism, and we're not getting away from it anytime soon. It's all about identity. It's all about politics. It's all about if I don't like your opinions, you're out, and we're going to replace somebody. We're going to replace you with somebody that we think deserves it more because of their opinion or their identity or something. So it's very interesting what is going on in the world right now with all of this. But that is it, guys, for tonight's show. Thank you so much for joining us. I really appreciate it. Appreciate you watching. We will be back again tomorrow night with a great show, 6 p.m. Pacific, 9 p.m. Eastern. Be sure to watch. It will be a good one. We're going to be talking about Julian Assange tomorrow night. So we're going to get the latest of where he's at with that extradition appeal that is coming up next month. Also, the court case of a few Americans who are suing the CIA. They had a big win. We're going to be talking about that. So be sure to join us again tomorrow night, 6 p.m. Pacific, 9 p.m. Eastern. Until then, guys, have a great night. Bye-bye.